You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So, Glenn, we've got some news out of Manhattan. Now, in the Manhattan DA's case, Trump's indictment is imminent. We can expect it any hour, day now. House Republicans, including Jim Jordan, are now demanding testimony from members of the Manhattan District Attorney's Office to answer for their apparent sin of investigating Donald Trump. Is this legal?
Brian, at a minimum, it's enough to open a criminal investigation. I don't say that lightly or recklessly or cavalierly, because what Kevin McCarthy has done in instructing all House committees available to, march to the assistance of Donald Trump and try to put a stop to Alvin Bragg's prosecution of Donald Trump. And we've seen a letter issue from the chairman of, I think, 3 committees, Jim Jordan, James Comer, and Brian Steele, basically saying to Alvin Bragg, we've got a real problem with you prosecuting or threatening to prosecute a former president of the United States. Here's the thing, Brian. The Congress doesn't have any jurisdiction to interfere in state criminal investigations or prosecutions. This really has the feel of members of Congress trying to investigate the investigators. Remember when that didn't turn out so well when Donald Trump and Bill Barr tried to do it, and they set special counsel John Durham on investigating the people who investigated Donald Trump's crimes. And of course, the Durham probe fell flat and basically ended in shame and disgrace because they couldn't win any cases. This is now members of Congress stepping out of their role as lawmakers and trying to interfere, and I use that word advisedly, interfere in a state criminal investigation and prosecution of their political deity, Donald Trump. That is a little thing I would call obstruction of justice. And based on even what's been publicly reported, it looks to me like there's what we call adequate predication, a fancy term for enough evidence to open a criminal probe of McCarthy, Jordan, Comer, and anybody else who is involved in what looks to be some illegal conduct.
And of course, the irony in all of this being that these are the people running a subcommittee on the weaponization of government. Like it is always just as clear projection as you could possibly find. Glenn, I want to ask you a question about that specifically. Is it not playing with fire to traffic in openly illegal activity and obstructing justice against the literal district attorney's office? It's like running a carjacking operation right outside of the police station, is it not?
Yeah, it is. And, the next thing that should happen is, frankly, Alvin Bragg, district attorney in New York, who's on the verge of indicting Donald Trump for his crimes, he needs to launch an investigation into Kevin McCarthy, Jim Jordan, Comer, and others for literally criminally interfering in his investigation and prosecution of Donald Trump. I know it's contorted and there's investigation on top of investigation, but this is too important not to be done. If you can have members of Congress say, for political reasons, we don't like who state district attorneys are prosecuting for crimes in their jurisdiction, crimes in their states. If you let, the McCarthy and the Jordans of the world get away with this, you give them an inch, man, they're going to take mile after mile after mile. So this has to be wrestled to the ground.
Well, Glenn, realistically speaking, if it took this long to hold Trump to account, or even to almost hold Trump to account, considering we're waiting on this indictment to drop, is it still not exceedingly unlikely that we would see justice against people like Kevin McCarthy and Jim Jordan for just being like accessories to this existing crime?
I mean, is it exceedingly unlikely that Kevin McCarthy and Jim Jordan will be held accountable for what appear to be crimes? It's pretty unlikely, right? If history teaches us anything. And that really is the problem with failing to hold what I call the ruling class criminals accountable. There is no deterrence. Just like if you don't hold Donald Trump accountable, well, then the next president who happens to be an aspiring dictator will get to do everything Donald Trump just did with impunity, right? The next president can leverage congressional funds to bribe and extort world leaders to announce, false investigations about their political opponents. And the next wannabe dictator can incite an insurrection with impunity if Donald Trump isn't held accountable for these things. The same holds true of members of Congress. Remember, 6, I believe, members of Congress asked for pardons because they knew they'd committed crimes on and around January 6th, and they wanted desperately to get away with those crimes. And they thought the best shot I have is getting a presidential pardon. These things, Brian, have gone unaddressed. Yeah, and because they've gone unaddressed, it lands us where we are today with McCarthy, Jordan, and others acting lawlessly.
And to your point, I mean, we've seen, because Trump's actions on January 6th effectively went unaddressed, we saw Jair Bolsonaro do the exact same thing in Brazil, where he tried to, incite his insurrection there. We saw Donald Trump right now at this very moment trying to incite his mob to come and protest in New York against his impending indictment in Manhattan. So to your exact point, this happens over and over again, and it's owed to the fact that when you don't prosecute these people for their illegal activity, it just emboldens them to do it all the more. Glenn, I want to switch gears here to another jurisdiction where Trump is awaiting imminent indictment, and that is Georgia. So it seems that Trump's lawyers pulled out one last-ditch effort to try and save him from that impending indictment. And his lawyers asked to quash an Atlanta special grand jury probe investigating his efforts to overturn the election. Now, we are days, weeks, hours away from an indictment there. What is this, and will it work?
It will not work. So Donald Trump's recent defense team filed what's called a motion to quash. What is a motion to quash? It's basically a motion to kill something, to stop something, to have a judge say, no, the prosecution can't do that. Let me tell you, most frequently, we see motions to quash filed when the prosecution has issued a subpoena and the recipient of that subpoena believes it's an illegal subpoena. The person can then have their lawyer file a motion to quash the subpoena, seeking to have the judge rule that, the prosecutors had no lawful right, no lawful authority to issue that subpoena, so I'm quashing it. I'm ruling it's invalid. But Brian, there really is no such thing as a motion to quash a grand jury report that has already been issued, and now Fani Willis has shifted back and is in the regular grand jury, asking that grand jury to indict folk for their crimes in Georgia. There really is no motion to quash that can be applied to those circumstances. This is like a last-ditch effort that is probably more, for public relations purposes, like fighting the battle in the court of public opinion, than actually fighting a legitimate legal battle in a court of law. So no, this will not work. And as you say, we are still awaiting Fani Willis's indictments.
Okay, so just a quick aside on that point exactly. Could Trump's lawyers who continue to abuse the system like this, could they be subjected to sanctions, given the fact that what they're doing is not serious? These are efforts to just delay his impending indictment. There's no precedent for anything he's doing, and they're not actually going to lead to anything?
There could be sanctions involved. Of course, other Trump lawyers have been sanctioned. Some have been fined. I guess
what's the line between abusing the system and using all of the levers that the system has available to you?
We've seen that line crossed before, right? We saw 60 or 65 frivolous suits brought attacking the election results. And in the aftermath of that, some of Trump's lawyers have been sanctioned. We've also seen them fined, I think, upwards of $1 million for filing, baseless lawsuits. So, but here's the thing, Brian, when it comes to a special grand jury report recommending that a former president be indicted, which is what we suspect we will learn very soon, it's a pretty unprecedented circumstance. So I could see a lawyer for Trump, a defense attorney, saying, well, that's unprecedented, so I'm going to file what is also admittedly an unprecedented motion, a motion to quash the grand jury report. And I don't think a defense attorney would be penalized or sanctioned for that, because we are in the land of the unprecedented at the moment. But, you know, the devil's in the details. And if there are successive, frivolous, baseless, dilatory challenges and motions filed, that's when I think you're going to see perhaps more sanctions and more fines.
And one final point on this Georgia case. Now, Fani Willis has said that her decision on whether or not she's going to indict is imminent. We've spoken about this on previous episodes, but for those just tuning in right now, first off, subscribe so that you don't miss previous episodes. But second, why would a prosecutor like Fani Willis say that her decision is imminent publicly if it isn't? Because, you know, that ship has sailed by now. It's been over a month since she said that. Like, what could have been District Attorney Willis's actual intent by putting that into the public sphere?
That's a great question, and I'm glad we're taking it on, because when Fani Willis said that her quote, charging decisions are imminent, that's very different from Fani Willis saying the indictments are imminent, right? And I think the way it landed with us, it landed with me, is, oh, that means she's about ready to indict. Well, not necessarily. Here's why she may have, carefully chosen her words, that her charging decisions were imminent. We learned from some of the grand jurors who have given interviews that they recommended that upwards of a dozen or more people be indicted. One of the grand jurors recently said, it's going to be massive. It's going to be massive. The grand juror said it twice, so I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's going to be massive. Yeah. So when Fani Willis announces my charging decisions are imminent, what is she doing? She's sending a signal, a very clear, very ominous signal to the dozen or more people who know that they are on the verge of being indicted, that I better get to Fani Willis before my name ends up as a marquee defendant on a big old conspiracy indictment. So she may have been announcing that not for the public's benefit, but for the benefit of squeezing the people that she's about to indict, giving them one last opportunity to come on board as cooperating witnesses. Now, I do think we're growing antsy, and, you know, it may be another few weeks, who knows, before we actually see the indictments. But, you know, I really do think she was doing that for tactical advantage, not for public relations advantage. So, Brian, let me ask you, because when I saw that Kevin McCarthy and these congressional committees are, in a very real sense, obstructing a New York state court prosecution of Donald Trump, I think of the legal implications and consequences. But, you know, you're the political expert, not me. What do you see as the political implications and consequences of this kind of gross abuse of power by members of Congress?
I think there isn't a planet on which this redounds to their benefit. Now, they may think that it will because they're in this bubble of, you know, these other far-right extremists. But if the American people sent any message over the last several election cycles, from 2018 to 2020 to 2022, it's that they are not on board with the extremism, the lawlessness, the self-dealing, everything that Trump traffics in. And yet, by virtue of these Republicans, all the way up to the leadership of that party, still throwing everything by the wayside and putting all of their resources behind Donald Trump, it just shows that that's all you're going to get. They might claim that they've changed, that everything's going to be different now. They're going to focus on inflation and gas prices and all of these things to help the American people. It's all bullshit. The only thing that these people are interested in is helping Donald Trump and putting all of their resources toward helping Donald Trump. For lack of a better term, it is a cult of personality. So I think that all these people have shown, just by virtue of, again, moving toward helping Donald Trump at the expense of everything else, at the expense of any other semblance of governing, it's just showing Americans that, you know, the same reason why they voted against Republicans in the last three election cycles, here's another reason to do it again. And so I think, you know, they might want to constantly kowtow to their base, because those are the people, those are the gatekeepers in terms of letting these Republican politicians actually in. You gotta get through the base if you want to have a chance at winning the general election, getting into Congress. But besides that, I mean, there is just no world in which this Republican Party stands for anything other than its fealty to Donald Trump.
Yeah, it feels like insanity that they just keep doubling down on a losing horse.
Yeah. And that's the ironic thing about all of this, is that these elections, when you lose an election, it's a great opportunity. Of course, it's bad news for you, but it's a great opportunity to retool, figure out what went wrong in the last election, and fix it for the next election moving forward. And we see these giant cyclical swings where one party's in power and then the other takes power from them. And it's because they've allowed themselves to adapt to what didn't work in the previous election cycle by virtue of burying their heads in the sand and pretending constantly over and over and over again that they're winning elections that they're very clearly losing. They're just depriving themselves of the ability to hone their message differently, to reach those people who they've lost. And, look, as long as they want to do it, I'm not going to stand in their way, but it really is just like you said. I mean, it is the definition of insanity, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So with that said, we'll continue to keep on top of all of this legal news. Again, for those watching, if you want to keep on top of this stuff with us, make sure to subscribe to both of our channels. The links are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.
Law enforcement said they're ready for any possible unrest if that does happen.
Well, and speaking of that, we have this video that we just got moments ago. This is the New York Police Department. They're installing security cameras on light posts that is outside the Manhattan Criminal Courthouse.
Authorities are preparing for potential outbreaks of violence following news that former President Donald Trump might get arrested and indicted in connection to the hush money payments that were paid to adult actress Stormy Daniels in the lead up to the 2016 presidential election. Now, when Trump heard of the news, he began riling up his supporters and encouraging them to not only get rowdy and violent on his behalf, but to protest. And he did that in multiple posts on Truth Social. We'll get to those comments in just a second, but let's back up and try to kind of figure out what this potential arrest could be about, when it's likely to happen, if it happens, and whether this is an open and shut case. Now, at the center of this case is the $130,000 that Donald Trump paid adult entertainer Stormy Daniels during the 2016 presidential election. They had met each other back in 2006 when Melania Trump was pregnant and engaged in a sexual rendezvous. Now, she had shared her story on 60 Minutes, and we knew the details about that. But apparently Trump decided to pay her $130,000 to kind of keep that story under wraps so it wouldn't hurt him during the presidential election. At least that's the theory. Now, if Trump is eventually indicted, it will be for falsifying business records in the first degree, which, by the way, that alone is just a misdemeanor. But it becomes a felony if he falsified records in order to commit another crime. In order to elevate it to a felony, the defendant needs to have created the fake records with an intent to commit or conceal another crime. Here, it's unclear whether the Manhattan District Attorney's Office plans to argue that there's a second crime. If the grand jury does not vote in favor of prosecuting it as a felony, it could direct the prosecutor to file a misdemeanor case instead, and this could all just be a big nothing burger. But with all of that said, Donald Trump has completely lost it and is trying to get his supporters to protest, which is why authorities in Manhattan are preparing for it with metal barricades and with surveillance cameras. So what do you think about this so far, Cenk?
Yeah, so this is political, but not in the way that the right wing thinks it is. So let me break it down. It took 5 years for the Manhattan DA's office to charge Donald Trump, who was a co-conspirator of Michael Cohen, after they charged him, convicted him, and sent him to prison. So what they wait around 5 years for? This is the one case that I was saying all along is open and shut. There's no question. He paid the hush money. It was a violation of campaign finance laws, and they falsified the records. There's overwhelming evidence to that effect, and they already convicted his co-conspirator, right? They waited around for permission from both Democratic and Republican establishment figures.
Bingo.
Because Republicans don't give a damn about Democratic establishment, but they do care about their own donors. They wait for permission from their own donors. Democrats wait for permission from their donors and Republican donors. And so finally, Alvin Bragg got that permission when the Koch brothers, Murdoch, and everybody else turned on Trump. So he's now like, oh, I've been waiting. Oh, I have permission, I'm gonna go forward now. Now,
Now that's your take on it, right? Like obviously you don't know for sure, but I think that your take on it is absolutely correct. I don't know if it has to do with donors. I think it has more to do with the political appetite on both sides.
100%.
The political appetite among establishment politicians on both sides to finish Trump.
Yeah, I don't want you to mistake what I'm saying. Anna's absolutely right. It's not like Alvin Bragg is going to get paid by Republican and Democratic donors for this.
Yeah.
It's groupthink. It's conventional wisdom. But for Democrats, they're the cowards and the weaklings in this play that you see, the national theater of politics. And so they wait for permission in the groupthink of like, oh, Republicans also agree. Okay, finally we can do something, right? And so that's why Bragg didn't do anything for all this time, and neither did his predecessor. So now, what is the play here? What are they going to do? Are they going to finally actually indict him? Yes, it looks like they're going to finally indict him, right? Is he going to actually go to prison? No way. No, because this is political. They're trying to hurt his chances, right? And distract him and smear him, etc. Now, the thing is, the right wing's thinking, what do you mean? That's exactly what we think. No, guys, he actually did do it. The real problem is that there's no equality here. If you had done it, you'd have gone to prison 5 years ago. How do I know? Michael Cohen, relatively regular guy, went to prison for 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? There's no question about it. They cover for the elites, and Trump is part of the elites. But now that the elites have turned on Trump, they're saying, okay, you can prosecute him like a regular person.
Yeah, exactly. The difference here is that for the first time, in my opinion, and I think in your opinion as well, you have the Republican establishment playing along with it, even though you might see on media, in the news, whatever,